Hi, so here I am back again with another video. This time the video is going to be on delegation. So let's get started. Here I am with the project that I ended up with last time. And let me just bring my right section here back where I can put a lot of stuff on to our view over here, our scene. So delegation is the concept where one object is doing something that is actually or should have been done by another object. So that other object is actually delegating the responsibility for something to a different object. So let me give you an example. So here I have in my list here somewhere, here I have a table view. I'm going to drag a table view to our little scene here, and so there it is. And this table view here, just let me give it a little, there you go. And this table view here will contain a table view cell. So I drag a table view cell onto as well. So here we go. Okay, so my table view here, it needs an outlet. So I do what we did last time. I drag from the table view to the view controller. I drag an outlet here. Let's call this one here my data table view. And so there's my outlet for it. Let me clean up here a bit. There you go. So here's the outlet for this table view. Now what does that mean that it's an outlet for the table view? Well, it means that the table view can be reached from the view controller, from this view controller here. This view controller have the ability to tell something to the table view, but the table view have nobody to talk to, and the table view needs to know, for instance, how much data it needs to display, or it needs to tell somebody, it needs to tell a view controller that the user clicked on an item inside of it. So this table view can actually be hooked up by using the didSet event listener. Whenever this my data table view comes into existence, or whenever it is being set, whenever it's being used in an expression on the left side of the expression, this didSet will execute. And this didSet here will simply say my data table view dot delegate or data source, sorry, not delegate, but data source is going to be me, self. What this means is that whenever this table view has something to ask for, like how many items it needs to display, it's going to ask its data source, which is a reference to this view controller. Now you can see here I get an error, and the reason for that is that the data source type, sorry, I can't give you a quick help here for some reason, but the data source type is a protocol. That protocol is called UI table view data source. And once I have that, this assignment is okay, because self, which is the view controller, is now of this type as well. So that's all good. But I still get an error. Now the error has moved up to the table view data source. And if I click here, you can see that it says that this table view controller, this my data list view controller, does not conform to the protocol, the UI table view data source. What that means is that I am not implementing the necessary functions that I need to implement in order to adhere to whatever it is that this table view here needs to ask me of. Put it differently. If I click fix it here, I will get two functions, these two functions. There's nothing in them yet. They don't do anything, but these two functions, they are actually something that could have been done in the table view, except that would be a very bad design choice. And the reason for that is I don't know if this table view here is going to be in a view controller that has 1,000,000 cells or 5 cells. So I need to put that piece of code that figures that out in its proper location and where to put it other than in the view controller, because the view controller knows how many cells to display. Okay, so the table view number of rows in section, which is the name of this function here, returns the number of elements to display. I don't have any elements yet, so let me create it. So I'm going to create a variable here, my data, and let that be an array of some simple data. So here I have 3 elements that I want to display in my table view. Okay, so going back to this table view number of rows in section function that I need to implement. Let me put a comment here, by the way. So there you go. This function here is simply called by the table view whenever it needs to create the table view. And this thing here needs to return an integer. That's what it says here. Let me give myself a little bit more room. So here I go. Now we have some more room. And all I need to do is say return the number of elements inside the my data, which is the data that I'm going to display anyway. So I can say my data dot count. That's an integer, and I am returning an integer from this one. Okay, the table view also needs to create the actual cell to display data in, and I can do that simply by going TableView.dequeue reusable cell with identifier for index path. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, huh? So I'm asking the table view, remember, I have already created an outlet. Here's my outlet. So my data table view. And so this table view here is that actual table view. I'm getting the table view as an argument in the function here. So in real life, I wouldn't actually need to have an outlet for the table view except for setting the data source and doing other stuff. But for figuring out what the cell should be, I don't need it because I actually get it here. So, but it is this variable here. Okay, so I'm asking the table view to give me a cell with a specific identifier and for a specific index path. Well, I do have an index path because I got that as well. So I can write index path here, which is that variable that I got with the function call. The string here is going to be a name for the cell. Remember, we actually created this one cell over here. And so I'm going to give that cell a name. So the cell's name is supposed to be typed in here in this identifier. So I selected the cell and I go to the table view cell identifier here. And here I'm going to call it my data cell. My data cell. That my data cell is the name of the identifier. So I will put that inside our with identifier string. See that? It says here with identifier my data cell, and I call it my data cell. So that's all fine. Now the next problem is that these cells, they have a type. So you can see right now that the type is custom. But I can use one of the 4 Apple provided types as, for instance, here, basic. So I'll use basic. And I can actually use that for the code that I will write here. So let's go back to the code. So this cell that I now have in my possession can be set. So I can go cell dot text label dot text, and I can set the text label's text to this my data, either sum or simple or data. Which one? I don't know. Well, actually I do, because index path is a number that reflects table views run on the individual cells that I need to display. So this function here, this table view cell for row at index path, will be executed for each and every cell that needs to be displayed. And the first time around, this index path here will reference the first cell, which is going to be sum. Well, it's not going to reference sum, but it's going to give me a value that I can use in order to access my data, sum. Next time around, the index path changes, and now it reflects the second. And the second one in my data is simple. And third time around, it's going to be data, and so on and so on. So here, I can simply say, let the text of the text label be my data index path dot row. I'm not going to explain this dot row for now, but let me assure you that the dot row is the actual value that I'm interested in. And it's supposed to be not test here, but text. So I made a typo. Okay. Now I have added some text to the text label. Oh yeah, and by the way, this text label here, it can actually be nil. So you can see here, I can click here and I can get a question mark here. So because the text label can be nil, it's not going to be nil, but it can be nil, then the rest of this stuff here is not going to be executed. So only if text label is not nil will I try to access its text property. That's what it says here. So now I have added some text to the cell, and I can return the cell. There you go. And then everything is fine. So now I have implemented the following two things in order to understand delegation. First up, I have created an outlet for the table view. And when I do that, I also set the table view's data source back, or referencing back to me. By referencing back to me, I need to implement some methods defined by the protocol called UI TableView datasource. Those two functions are these two. There's a whole bunch more to implement if you want to, but they're just optionals. These two are needed. I really need to implement these. Without these two, the whole table view will not function. So these two have to be implemented. And the first one of these two simply returns how many cells to return. And the next one here is called each time a cell needs to be displayed. And we're creating the actual cell. And then we're putting data into that actual cell and returning it. That's what we're doing here. So I have created a link between my view controller and the table view, and I have created a link back from the table view to the view controller. And that's what delegation has to do. You have to set its delegation value, and then that particular object that you are setting the delegation value in probably have a protocol. And if you implement the needed functions or methods for this protocol, then the object will be able to communicate with you, you being the view controller. Let's see if this thing here works. Let me change this to SE and run it. And as you can see, here's my table view. And each element here is actually the data that we created from our little variable called my data.